ancient Mesopotamia. Ground zero for some of the key inventions that shaped the modern world. Agriculture, writing, and yes, beer. Laws, government, taxes. They all began here too, in the fertile plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. "4,000 years ago, in this land between rivers, one man led another first-of-its-kind innovation. He conquered a vast domain, uniting diverse cultures under a single banner to form the world's first empire. His name was Sargon the Great."
Sargon didn't just expand the territories under his control, he really reimagined what it meant to wield power.
The Akkadians took many of their ideas, their culture, trade, language, to the very corners of their empire. This really had a profound and long-term effect on history.
How did Sargon forge an empire, and why did it vanish so suddenly? What new evidence can the latest techniques uncover?
The influence of the Akkadians cannot be overstated. They influenced areas from Asia to the Mediterranean. They effectively set the blueprint for what an empire is for generations to come.
But after a meteoric rise, the Akkadian Empire declined, and within 4 generations, collapsed. The very existence of the empire fell into obscurity for centuries. Archaeologists have grappled with the mystery of the Akkadians' collapse since their rediscovery.
Countless theories have come and gone, but we don't have a definite answer.
But now, groundbreaking advances in technology are peeling back the layers, uncovering new insights into the rise and fall of the world's first empire.
The fall of the Akkadian Empire is one of history's greatest enigmas. This is a real historical riddle. How did this affluent empire face such decline? Technology is finally giving us the answers.
Think of an empire, any empire. Empires define human history. Their rise and fall mark the milestones of human civilization. But what makes an empire? Is it vast lands? Wealth? A unifying leader? His family? But hold up. Before we talk about the first empire, let's answer a basic question. What is an empire? Empire, an extensive group of states or countries ruled over by a single monarch, an oligarchy, or a sovereign state.
Today, we're accustomed to the idea of a single entity, a single power, a person ruling a multitude of people. But back in the ancient world, this was a new concept.
In 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia was divided into city-states, with 2 dominant cultures, the Akkadians in the north and the Sumerians in the south.
Each city was ruled by a local king, or lugal, and there was a strong priesthood. However, their power would usually be quite limited.
Around 2350 BCE, the Sumerian city-states were at fierce competition with each other, vying for power and influence, conquering and pillaging one another. This is where Sargon enters the picture, but not as a king. Sargon has a much humbler origin story.
Most of what we know about Sargon's reign comes from 2 clay tablets that were written some hundreds of years after his death. The first is called The Legend of Sargon, which is right here, and the second is called Sargon and Urza-Baba.
According to the legend, Sargon was the illegitimate son of a priestess. Fearing for her son, his mother stowed him away in a reed basket, sealed it with bitumen, and cast him down the Euphrates River. It's an origin story he shares with Moses, Romulus and Remus, and the Hindu hero Karna. Sargon was discovered by Aki, the palace gardener in Kish, who raised him as his own. As he grew, Sargon earned a prestigious role as the king's cupbearer, a trusted position, ensuring the safety of the king's food and drink. But one night, Sargon had a chilling dream. He saw the king drowning in a river of blood. When word of the dream reached Baba, Sargon was summoned. He recounted his vision: the river, the blood, the drowning. The king, gripped by fear, believed this was a sign that Sargon would replace him. In his panic, Baba made a fatal mistake. He plotted to kill Sargon. But the goddess was on Sargon's side, warning him of the danger. 10 days later, to everyone's shock, Sargon reappeared at court. He overthrew Baba and claimed power. With the throne secured, Sargon united the Akkadian tribes, gathered a mighty army, and marched south.
Sargon was a master of what we would now call propaganda. So after usurping the throne of Kish, he then began this process of legitimizing himself. Even the name Sargon is a political tool. It means legitimate or true king. And of course, what better name to give yourself when you're a usurper? The name Sargon didn't just define this man, it really replaced him. His birth name was lost to history.
After seizing the throne of Kish, Sargon set out with his army, conquering city after city.
Back then, the common practice was to see cities as basically sources of loot, something to be pillaged, to be destroyed, to be taken for short periods of time.
However, Sargon took a bold new approach. He installed a ruler, assimilated the conquered land into his administration, and then taxed it. Why pillage once when you can do it continuously over time? Sargon moved the capital of his expanding empire to Akkad. The city itself became immensely rich as goods poured in from pillage, trade, and taxes.
In ancient Mesopotamia, taxes came in the form of grain. Sargon was able to use this to fund one of his key innovations, which was to create one of the world's first standing armies.
When kings went to war in ancient Mesopotamia, they conscripted troops from the male population. Once the campaign was over, the men returned to their usual jobs as farmers, bakers, craftsmen, but not Sargon.
Sargon had the brilliant idea of actually changing this. He developed a professional corps of 5,000 plus soldiers to go off on campaign whenever he needed them. The benefit of a standing army is you can campaign whenever you need to. You can surprise your enemies when they're not ready. This gave Sargon a huge advantage relative to his rivals.
Sargon used his standing army to squash down rebellions and expand his power across all Mesopotamia. The Akkadian army used copper-tipped spears, armor, and shields. Paired with his professional soldiers, Sargon was able to employ complex tactics and formations. One of these was an early form of the phalanx, with men armed with pikes and axes, while the front line carried large rectangular shields. Similar tactics would be used for thousands of years. But was this enough to keep the empire together?
Military might can only get you so far, because while a standing army can get you territory, it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be able to hold it.
Sargon understood that if you wanted to hold territory and build an empire, you needed something more mundane.
One of the great innovations the Akkadians introduced was actually bureaucracy that kept track of all of the trade and the taxes, things like grain production and even beer production.
To power their bureaucracy, the Akkadians relied on a Sumerian invention.
Writing had been developing for over 1,000 years by the time Sargon came to power, and initially it was used to record documents such as this, which is the contract for a sale of a house, which was paid for in silver rings.
Along with a robust bureaucracy, Sargon consolidated his rule by centralizing power in Akkad and appointing loyal Akkadians to positions of power in the conquered cities. But how did Sargon unite diverse cultures under one ruler? To foster unity, Sargon and his successors celebrated their victories with statues, monuments, and large stone carvings called steles.
For example, this one, it reads, "I am Manishtushu, son of Sargon, a strong king, king of Kish." At this time, most people were illiterate, they couldn't read. However, the function of objects such as this were to remind people that there's someone in control and that they're part of this broader realm.
But visual symbols weren't the only tools Sargon used to unite his empire.
While Sumerian was still spoken, the Akkadian language began to replace it. Akkadian becomes effectively a lingua franca, a kind of common language for more than 1,000 years. The Akkadian language belongs to what's called the Eastern Semitic languages. It's distantly related to languages such as Arabic, Hebrew, but it's a different branch of Semitic.
Hundreds of Akkadian clay tablets lay untranslated in museums across the world. Too many for the small number of experts capable of translating them.
Translating Akkadian texts is a complex and time-consuming task. It requires deep knowledge of the language as well as the culture.
But now, a team of researchers is beginning to harness artificial intelligence to aid in the translation process.
The Babylonian Engine is an AI-assisted environment for translation and decipherment of ancient cuneiform texts. The first step, you see an image and it identifies where the signs of cuneiform are. Those signs are then transformed into zeros and ones, in which the computer can identify what these signs are. Those Unicode signs are then transliterated into Latin characters, and then it translates them into a modern language, just like a Google Translate, basically. The Babylonian Engine is a work in progress still. They will allow us to decipher texts that we haven't deciphered before.
As the Babylonian Engine and other AI tools improve, we hope that one day they can revolutionize our understanding of the Akkadian language.
Under the Akkadians, trade flourished. Traders brought tin and gold, lumber and spices.
The cities were a wonder of their time. There would be monumental buildings, from temples to palaces, decorated with lapis lazuli and pearls, as well as with statues made out of bronze and tin, which was really rare for that time.
Under the Akkadians, the arts flourished. Their artifacts are full of detail that we hadn't quite seen before. They are exquisite. One example is the Psitki statue. This is a statue base that when archaeologists found it, they were quite surprised at the detail that they saw. It resembled classical period kinds of artifacts.
In this period of relative peace and prosperity, knowledge and technology could also advance, while the spread of the empire allowed ideas to travel to new lands, helping disseminate knowledge and technology. One such concept was the sexagesimal system.
The sexagesimal system is a counting system with base 60. It was foundational to Mesopotamian astronomy and mathematics. But why 60? It comes down to human anatomy. One hand would be counting the digits from 1 to 12 using the 3 phalanges on each of the 4 fingers, excluding the thumb. The other hand keeps track of these sets of 12. So the first set would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's one set. Then you would have your second set until you have 5 sets, which makes 60. This way of counting is the reason that we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour till this day.
After Sargon's death, his sons continued expanding the empire, spreading the Akkadian language and ideas, like the Base 60 system, to its farthest reaches. But it wasn't until Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin, took power that the empire reached its greatest heights.
Naram-Sin conquers a vast territory and takes the empire to its farthest extent, conquers effectively the eastern Mediterranean region, areas such as the Levant, Lebanon, Turkey, and he also goes to Iran, to the Zagros Mountains, bordering the regions of the Gutians.
However, even with all these advances, trouble was a constant throughout the empire.
During the period of the Akkadians, there were quite a lot of rebellions against the empire. For instance, even during the reign of Sargon, there were cities rebelling against his reign. He would have to respond to these rebellions by mobilizing his troops and crushing the revolting cities, sometimes destroying and taking away the populations as slaves.
As the empire expanded into new territories, the population surged. As demand grew, grain production in the Fertile Crescent had to increase, driving the Akkadians to cultivate new lands in the north.
Unlike southern Mesopotamia, which relied on irrigation to water its fields, northern Mesopotamia depended on rainfall for its crops. This may have been one of the first cracks that showed in the empire.
Shortly after the reign of Naram-Sin, the Akkadian Empire spanned from Turkey and the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. With a powerful standing army, complex administration, and a dominant Akkadian language.
Within a few decades, Akkadian control of the empire seems to have collapsed. How did this happen? What could possibly have led to the disintegration of the empire?
To answer these questions, we must dig for new evidence. But this is easier said than done.
Archaeology can be inherently challenging. It can be messy. It can be dirty. Akkadian sites are particularly difficult. They are located basically in deserts today. They are very dusty. You have sandstorms, conditions going like, everything's just kind of hard to see, and you're just sort of try to work as much as you can before it gets too difficult. It just hurts to open your eyes. When you excavate an Akkadian site, you find often many of the remains are like dust. They just sort of whittle away as soon as you find them. Then you all have the other issue where a lot of these sites are also quite deep because they've been lived on for a long time. So you have to dig very, very deep.
The reason why Akkadian sites are so difficult is closely tied to the very way civilization rose and spread in this region.
Tells are absolutely fundamental to Mesopotamian archaeology. A tell is another word for a mound. These mounds are made up of layers of human occupation. So if you think about one layer of human habitation that ends and another is built on top of it, then over time, you're going to get layer upon layer of human history. To reach the Akkadian levels, you therefore have to go through the tell and down through hundreds of years of other human settlements. So this is a very delicate process.
The fact that we even know there is an Akkadian empire is actually a major victory in and of itself.
For centuries after its downfall, the Akkadian Empire was lost and unknown to history. It wasn't until the 19th century that archaeologist Sir Austen Henry Layard unearthed evidence of its existence in the ruins of Nineveh.
At that site, he basically made one of the greatest discoveries in archaeology, the Ashurbanipal Library, a massive collection of ancient written texts.
Named for the last great king of the Assyrian Empire, it's a collection of more than 30,000 clay tablets and fragments containing texts of all kinds from the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists poring through it found that the Assyrian tablets mentioned a once great empire covering all the known world. It was the Akkadian Empire and its mighty kings. But grasping their profound impact and unraveling their mysteries remains a formidable task to this day.
With the Akkadian Empire, we have to piece together our knowledge, sometimes from sources that are hundreds, even thousands of years older than the actual empire itself. There are gaps in our knowledge, so we actually still don't even have an accurate timeline for the start and fall of the Akkadian Empire.
Without a clear timeline, the Akkadian Empire continues to be an archaeological puzzle. How can we find out how the empire fell when we don't know exactly when it existed?
We know that the Akkadian Empire lasted around 180 years, but pinpointing exactly when it started and when it fell has proved to be a lot more challenging.
Timelines are critical for understanding a lot of things in archaeology, knowing exactly when things begin and when they end. For instance, when the Akkadian Empire began and when it ended. It allows us to compare events from different regions. So, for instance, what's happening in Egypt versus what's happening in Mesopotamia and Akkadia. Without establishing timelines, it becomes very difficult for us to know not only when events actually occurred, but also the significance of events. Traditional archaeological dating is not necessarily a good fit for the Akkadian Empire.
Radiocarbon dating is a technique scientists use to determine the age of an object. It works by finding trace amounts of radioactive isotopes in organic material and comparing the amount present in the object with the half-life of the radioactive isotope, or how long it takes for half the radioactive material to decay. One such isotope is carbon-14, found in all living creatures.
Here we run into a problem. Traditional radiocarbon dating requires bone or other organic material. If we don't have this organic material, what do we do then? The other issue with radiocarbon dating is its lack of precision. The margin of error is plus or minus 300 years. So even if we had organic matter to date, it means that we could miss the rise and the fall of the Akkadian Empire.
To find when the Akkadians ruled, we need a tool that doesn't rely on organic matter and that has pinpoint accuracy. Scientists have now found one, linked to an unexpected source: Earth's magnetic field.
Earth is a dynamic planet. In the heart of our planet is a solid iron-nickel ball. Surrounding it is liquid rock. That liquid spins round the metal core, creating a huge magnetic field that extends out into space. Unlike a typical bar magnet, the Earth's magnetic field is constantly changing. Changes in its strength, but also the direction. Archaeomagnetism is a technique that allows us to date non-organic material. It detects small changes in the Earth's magnetic field that are preserved in magnetic minerals.
One of these magnetic minerals is iron oxide. When it is heated to around 770 degrees Celsius, known as the Curie point, it loses its magnetic properties. As the material cools, it realigns with the Earth's magnetic field, capturing a record of its strength and direction at that time.
It is basically taking a snapshot of the Earth's magnetic field. Recently, the methodology has become so good we can now date objects down to a few decades.
Archaeomagnetism could put us one step closer to finding when exactly the Akkadians ruled. We just need a source of iron oxide from their time. But where do we find iron in a Bronze Age civilization?
Mesopotamians had been using bricks to build their structures for thousands of years. And that would be everything from homes to great temples. Initially, they used sun-dried bricks, but then at around 4000 BCE, they started kiln firing their bricks at extremely high temperatures. This is where it gets interesting. When you kiln fire bricks, it changes their color, it changes their chemical composition, and it also makes them much more durable. More importantly, the clay used in ancient Mesopotamia was very, very high in iron oxide. And it's the iron oxide that allows us to use archaeomagnetism to date the bricks.
Akkadian kings often stamped their names on bricks used to build temples or administrative buildings. They often not only put their names on bricks, but they also would put the year during their rule. Many of these bricks were actually baked bricks, that is, they were kiln fired. The benefit of having the name stamped on the brick is it allows us to pair the brick with the Earth's magnetic field at the time.
With the aid of this advanced technique, the researchers have made a remarkable discovery. Finally, they are able to pinpoint the rise and fall of the world's first empire.
So fortunately, because we had the names on the bricks and the years in which these bricks were made, we can now pin the beginning of the Akkadian Empire as well as its fall to a specific timeline.
Thanks to the mud brick samples, we know the empire rose roughly in 2334 BCE and fell 180 years later in 2154 BCE. But this doesn't tell us why Sargon's empire disappeared. We still don't know what led to the Akkadians' downfall.
We know something happened. Roughly 180 years after the rise of Sargon, the empire collapsed.
Recent discoveries in northern Mesopotamia point to rapid decline.
Tel Brak was a major Akkadian city. Researchers found there the palace of Naram Sin. However, the palace was incomplete and seems to have been abandoned. Unused clay balls for making cuneiform tablets were found lying on the ground. This is strong evidence that it was abandoned and that people just got up and left.
Across Mesopotamia, cities that once flourished fell into ruin. Up to 2/3 of settlements in northern Mesopotamia severely declined or were completely abandoned in this period.
People don't just get up and leave their homes, not then and not now. So there must have been something to provoke this mass migration.
The Sumerian King List, a text from 1800 BCE, gives us a glimpse into the chaos.
The Sumerian King List gives us the names of rulers and how long they ruled, and it stretches back hundreds of years. Around the fall of the Akkadian Empire, it shows several kings in quick succession, along with the inscription, who was king, who was not king. This is clear evidence that the empire was in trouble. What isn't clear is why.
Archaeologists have several competing theories trying to answer what led to the Akkadian Empire's downfall.
One of these theories is the invasion or the incursion of the Gutian tribes from the Zagros. Another theory points to rebellion as a main culprit to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire.
However, clues found within the text of an ancient legend suggest another reason for the empire's collapse.
The Curse of Akkad was written hundreds of years after the fall of the Akkadian Empire, and it tells the story of Naram Sin, who is Sargon's grandson. The story goes that having conquered Nippur, Naram Sin sacks the temple of Enlil and declares himself a living god. There are two interesting clues here. The first is that there's a mention of Nippur. Nippur had been part of the Akkadian Empire for decades already, so this suggests that it had to be reconquered after revolting against the king. The second hint comes from these lines. In the plains where grew the heart-soothing plants, grew nothing but the reed of tears. Akkad, instead of its sweet-flowing water, there flowed bitter water. There's one line that really sticks out, and that is, nothing grew but the reed of tears. These lines are very ominous and suggest to us that, as well as crop failure, there may have been some broader climate crisis in the region.
Dr. Stacey Carolyn of Oxford University is convinced that a change in the region's climate could be the reason for the Akkadian Empire's demise.
As paleoclimatologists, what we do is we look at rocks, ice, sediments deep under the ocean, and look for evidence within those of climate in the past.
Dr. Carolyn and her team have been deploying an innovative way to peek into the climate of ancient Mesopotamia from an unlikely source.
Stalagmites are basically time capsules of ancient climate. They grow layer upon layer over thousands of years, and they capture information about the rainfall and about the environment above the cave, which is all related to the weather and climate of that time.
The reason why stalagmites are so useful to paleoclimatologists is linked to how they form.
When rain and melting snow seep through the ground, it picks up carbon dioxide, creating a weak acid. Although this acid is weak, as it passes through the rocks, it dissolves minerals, particularly calcium carbonate. As this mineral-rich water drips into the cave, it leaves some of those minerals behind. Over thousands of years, this water drips down and creates icicle-like deposits called stalactites. And as it drips onto the floor, it builds up stalagmites. These stalagmites are what we're interested in.
The speed at which the stalagmites grow is directly related to rainfall. More rainfall means more growth. Less rain, and the speleothem grows slower.
In dry climates, it's more difficult to find stalagmites because you need water. If you have a small amount of water or the drips are slower, the stalagmite will also grow slower. On average, a stalagmite growth rate is about 0.1 millimeters per year, which is the thickness of a human hair.
Each layer of the stalagmite is like a ring on a tree, marking the passage of time.
So here I'm just going to show you the stalagmite that was used for this project. You can see in the upper bit of the stalagmite, there's a large piece missing. And what I found was that 2/3 up from the base, growth rate decreased, by a factor of 10, and this period of slow growth lasted for 400 years. The conclusion from seeing that signal in the stalagmite is dry and dusty conditions that are anomalous relative to the baseline climate of that period.
The analysis of the stalagmite revealed a prolonged drought, evidence of a broad climatic change. Could a catastrophic climate event have brought the world's first empire to its knees?
The 4.2K event stands for a cold, dry spell that occurs at about 4.2 thousand years ago. The most dramatic effect of the 4.2K event is a 200-year-long drought. And it had a huge effect on civilizations in Mesopotamia, the Old Kingdom in Egypt, in the Indus Valley, and through into China. This prolonged drought had a huge impact on the region. Migration started, people started to disperse, and therefore civilizations started to crumble and eventually collapse. The 4.2K event isn't fully understood. We have a good understanding of the impacts, but what we're less sure about is what are the causes. Now, we know that over the last 10,000 years, there have been millennial cycles, 1,500-year cycles in climate. And these are driven by changes in ocean circulation in the North Atlantic.
Ocean currents, like those in the Atlantic, act as thermal conveyor belts, distributing heat and influencing climate globally. Disruptions in these currents can lead to dramatic shifts in weather patterns across vast regions.
The evidence for the 4.2K event is very strong in our records from both the Mediterranean and Iran.
But did this climate event affect the Akkadians? Dr. Carolyn has found intriguing clues in her research deep inside the Golizad cave in Iran.
We found in our stalagmite a high amount of magnesium during the period of slow growth. We believe this magnesium comes from dolomite, which is not found in our cave system, but it is sourced from the Mesopotamia region, which supported the idea of a dry event 4,000 years ago.
However, scientists continue to search for further evidence.
These samples from Iran are incredibly valuable to us. However, the problem is these samples also come from a region that's relatively far away from where the events occurred. The cave is more than 1,000 kilometers away from these Akkadian cities. We can't be sure that the dust actually came from Mesopotamia. There are wind patterns that are called the Shamal winds that exist today. These are wind patterns that could move the dust from Iraq to Iran. However, we don't know if those wind patterns were similar in the past.
Dr. Carolyn's results put us closer to proving that the 4.2K event had a definite impact on the Akkadian Empire. But without further evidence, we can't know for certain.
What we need is to find the perfect cave, close to the cities of ancient Arcadia, with pristine stalagmites. We want the stalagmites to be the right age, so they cover that period. Actually, what we need is a lot of expeditions and a little bit of luck.
Dr. Mark Alterwheel and his team believe they have found an ideal sample from a cave in Mesopotamia, just 500 kilometers away from Tel Leilan, a well-known Akkadian site.
From the sample from Shalei Cave, we can tell that ancient Iraq had a very lush environment. There were date palms, even oak. You have wide rivers and wide channels, lots of irrigation activity, and ancient cities were just beginning to start. But then, around 4,000 years ago, things become drier.
Together, Dr. Carolan's and Dr. Altawheel's findings offer strong evidence that a climate shift affected ancient Mesopotamia. All that remains to link the 4.2K event and the fall of the Akkadians is to date the samples from the caves. If the samples match what we found in our bricks, then we'll know there was a definitive link. To determine the age of the stalagmites, archaeologists rely on another sophisticated dating technique, one that doesn't depend on organic material nor iron oxide.
Most stalagmites have trace amounts of uranium and thorium, which are both radioactive elements. These decay with time, which can tell you the age that rock formed. To get the age of a stalagmite, what we do is drill out a calcite sample powder, dissolve it, and then run that solution on a highly advanced mass spectrometer, which tells us the ratio of the uranium and thorium, which eventually will tell us the age.
The results are in. The team has dated the samples back to 2200 BCE. Nearly an exact match to what we found from our kiln-fired bricks. This means there was a clear overlap between the Akkadian Empire and the 4.2K event.
The impact of the 4.2K event on the Akkadian Empire would have been devastating. Rain would have been reduced to a mere trickle compared with before. Crop failure in the north of Mesopotamia would have been all but certain. This was a key factor in the empire's downfall, but it's not the whole story.
In 2254 BCE, Naram-Sin had expanded Sargon's empire from the Persian Gulf in the south to the Taurus Mountains in Anatolia. But as his son Shah-Khalil Shari took power in 2217 BCE, the empire was already floundering.
It must have been a challenge to keep all of these cities in control, even in the good times. After generations of Akkadian rule, after taxation and conscription, the cities of the south were all but ready to revolt.
As rainfall dwindled, once fertile lands turned to dust, and crops failed across northern Mesopotamia. Entire cities like Tel Leilan and Tel Brak were quickly abandoned.
Thousands were forced to migrate southwards to the Sumerian territories. This sudden surge of migrants put huge pressure on the food reserves in the south. This led to an increase in tensions and uprising in cities such as and Uruk.
Fighting unrest, an unprecedented drought, and dust storms, the Akkadian Empire was in a weak position, all but ready for an enemy to seize their chance.
In their conquests, the Akkadians made many enemies. One of these enemies were the Gutians.
The Gutians, a nomadic tribe from modern-day Iran, saw the weakened empire and seized the opportunity. they launched incursions into the empire, destroying trade routes and pillaging cities across the region.
The final strike seems to have been when the Gutians attacked Akkad itself, which was the heart of the empire.
In 2154 BCE, the Gutians laid waste on Akkad, the capital of the empire, and razed it to the ground.
As Akkad fell, the Gutians seized power, and this ushered in a dark age in the region.
Without the Akkadian administrative system, trade, literacy, the arts all declined. Ultimately, the old city-states regained control, ushering in an era of relentless conflict among petty rulers. Over the course of millennia, the very existence of the Akkadian Empire fell into obscurity and was eventually forgotten. With the help of technology, we've uncovered the story of the Akkadian Empire. From Sargon's legendary rise from humble origins to the establishment of an empire that stretched beyond Mesopotamia.
The Akkadian Empire was a marvel of its time, diverse, wealthy, and united under one ruler. It was unprecedented in complexity and cultural richness.
Today's cutting-edge technologies and archaeological methods have helped unravel some of the mysteries surrounding the Akkadians. But there's still so much left to discover.
There are many big questions and discoveries that have yet to be made. For example, the capital of the Akkadian Empire, Akkad, has yet to be found. We believe Akkad may be somewhere near modern-day Baghdad, but so far, the find has been elusive. Hopefully, in the years to come, modern techniques in archaeology will lead to a major discovery. There are hundreds, actually thousands of tablets that have yet to be deciphered. We hope that AI will help us translate these texts in the years to come.
Sargon and the Akkadians established a powerful form of governance that has risen and fallen countless times throughout history. They created the first empire and standing army. During their reign, the arts and knowledge flourished. While they did not invent writing, timekeeping, or mathematics, they helped spread these innovations, leaving a lasting legacy that shapes our world today. In his victory stele over the Lullaby, we see Naram-Sin wearing the horned helmet of the gods.
He is shown standing twice as tall as any other man, taking prisoners, throwing enemies off the mountain top. He is the very image of a living god. But Sargon the Great and the world's first empire reminds us of the dangers of overexpansion, of arrogant leadership, and the impact of rapidly changing climate conditions. Every one of those things is as relevant today as it was 4,000 years ago.